Welcome to Club Soda's Mindful Drinking Festival. We're online, global, and as always, absolutely free. Hi, I'm Drew, and I'm one of the co-founders of Club Soda.
And I'm Laura, the other co-founder of Club Soda. We help you change your drinking in ways that help you live well. So whether you're looking to cut down, stop for a bit, or quit, you can find what you need from podcasts and books and courses on joinclubsoda.com. This festival, we've brought you an amazing lineup from over 100 people from across the world.
And our programme this time really is global.
Every day starts down under with me, Sarah. As well as organising the festival in Australia, I spend my time looking for alcohol-free alternatives and tips for people who choose not to drink, but who still want to live a social, fun and adventurous life.
And I'll be wrapping up each day here in the States. I'm Amanda, your US festival host and coordinator, and I'm also a mindset coach who helps women change their relationship with alcohol so that they can start living their most authentic life.
Each day with a rolling programme of inspirational panels, conversations, social events, and opportunities to discover new low and low alcohol drinks.
So whether you want inspiration to change your drinking,
Or to connect with other people,
or you want to discover and enjoy a new low and no alcohol drink,
The Mindful Drinking Festival is for you.
cheers!
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 cheers.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Marcus Barnes, and we're here on the Champs Motivation stage at the Mindful Drinking Festival. I am a journalist, author, and copywriter, and I've been sober for about 18 months now. And I'm here with Shahroo Izadi, who's the author of The Kindness Methods. And I guess most of our conversation is going to be based around kindness and, self-compassion and how that can play back into the journey towards sobriety and how to maintain a sober life. Shahroo, can you sort of explain in sort of basic terms what the kindness methods entails to begin with?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. Hi, Marcus.
Hi.
The Kindness Method is a book about habit change. So it gives you tools and written exercises, and it's inspired by what I learned working in addiction, helping people who were achieving recovery from substance misuse. And it's a lot of sort of really simple tools that people can use in their everyday lives to manage their drinking habits, or indeed manage any habit at all. And that's what I do in a nutshell, just help people to change their habits, primarily by being nicer to themselves.
And how long had you been working in addiction before this idea of the kindness methods came to fruition?
Not very long, actually. I wasn't in addiction very long at all. No, I do a bit of work still now, but I did a placement with the NHS, and then I worked for a couple of addiction charities for a couple of years and in criminal justice. But it was really early on. It was like the first training that I went on when we started being trained on these tools like motivational interviewing and ITEP mapping and asset-based community development and all these things that I found really cool that was our training at work, because they were so relevant to my day-to-day life, and I had some real problems with my eating habits.
Right.
And I noticed that the same tools that were helping people achieve recovery from substances other than sugar were actually really helpful, and the missing piece to what I needed when it came to changing my own habits. So it was really early on, and that I became really passionate about letting other people know, like, you don't need to part with loads of money. You don't need to build a shrine and write a journal every morning really early, and all of this stuff that I just assumed I would kind of have to do to be into well-being and habits and stuff. And none of the tools that I hand over are not familiar to people who are already in long-term recovery. And I just wanted to make that stuff available to the general population.
It's funny because it's in essence, it's quite a simple concept, kind of self-love, self-compassion, being kind to yourself. But as I found from my own personal experience, it's actually, most of us are quite horrible to ourselves in our own minds, and we have the self-critic, we have the bully in our mind, and we beat ourselves up for failures, for not being perfect, and all, lots of negative self-talk. And for my own experience with that was I went to a 10-day silent meditation retreat, and the first time I went, it's a really difficult process that you go through anyway, like mentally and physically. You kind of sit for like hours at a time and in total silence, and you don't move your posture. And it's really painful mentally and physically. And the first time I went there, I couldn't do it. And obviously I couldn't do it because I've never done it before. But everything that all my reactions were, why can't you do this? You're so rubbish, blah, blah, blah. And I went again because I'm a glutton for punishment. I went for a second 10-day retreat. And after 4 days, I started to think, none of this self-talk is working for me. All I keep doing is beating myself up, and it's making it worse. If that was like my mom, if that was my partner, if that was my best friend, I would be like, hey, look, don't worry, it's okay. Don't worry, it's okay. You'll get through this. Even if it was a stranger, I'd show compassion to them. So why can't I do that to myself? So then I started gradually going, it's okay, Marcus, I love you. You're okay. It'll be fine. And it started to get a bit better. I mean, it wasn't like, I wasn't automatically enlightened, but it did help to make the process a bit easier.
It does. I completely agree with you. And I think that's the first step. And it's not easy. Not easy at all, because a lot of the time we discover that way we've been speaking to ourselves is quite deeply ingrained, and we've been doing it since we were quite young. But I agree with you. When I first wrote the kindness method, I would tell people, try to speak to yourself like someone you love. Yeah. And of course that still applies, but you don't even need to love that person. You just need to want to see them do well. Speak to yourself like someone who you want to succeed. Like even if someone was paying you to make them succeed and you hated them, you wouldn't speak. You would, the words that motivate, the tone that motivates, it's compassionate, it's understanding. And I think a lot of people make the mistake of thinking, well, if I'm nice to myself all the time, then I'll just do whatever I want. I'll just let myself do whatever I want. And actually, when you take the example of what you would do for a loved one, very often the advice we would give a loved one is not it's not the easy advice. It's the thing we would advise them to do, the thing that they were happy that they'll look back on tomorrow and be happy that they did, and it tends to have their overall well-being in mind. So I think it can help enormously to think about why there is such a gap between the way you speak to yourself and the way you would speak to everyone else. And luckily, I don't think it's as difficult to change. It's not easy, but it's not as difficult to change as a lot of people expect when you see how effective it is at helping you to change habits.
100%. 100%. Just, going back to the example that I gave, in the space of a day, the physical and mental anguish that I was going through was reduced by about 10 or 20%, just through saying, it's okay, you'll be all right,
Yeah, and when you see the power of that itself becomes quite intoxicating, I find. When you realize that you have the capacity, and again, I know it sounds simple, but for me, this stuff was just mind-blowing. When you realize that you have the capacity to talk yourself in or out of something, or to soothe yourself, it's like a superpower we didn't know was there, or that we were just using for evil before.
And how did it play out for you then? How did you manage to kind of flick that switch from negative self-talk to more positive self-talk, and then get yourself on the sort of the path to adopting the kindness methods?
There were a few things. For me, first of all, when I was observing the people who were doing really well in recovery, there's flies all over my flat. I've got one of those. When I was observing the people who were doing really well, they seemed to have that in common. They seemed to have self-compassion and self-forgiveness in common. And that was directly contributing to, I feel, how resilient they were when they were challenged, and it was helping them with impulse control, and it was helping them to calm down and create a space between wanting to do something and doing some and actually going through with it. So between stimulus and response, if you like. That was definitely compelling. It was put forward a compelling case for this kindness stuff. The other one was, I used to be very much one of those people who had my life on hold. So I always wanted to lose weight. That was my thing. And I was always losing and gaining enormous amounts of weight, and not healthily. It was about abusing myself with food, essentially, and then abusing myself for having abused myself. And I was in counseling a few years ago, and my counselor said to me, what if you never get there? What if you never lose weight? And I was really quite angry with her, because I had this sort of I had decided that I would be worthy of doing like nice things to myself or speaking nicely to myself once I had done those things. Once I get there, I'll be nice to myself.
Yeah.
And I was like furious. But I gave it a bit of thought, and I realized actually if I started doing those things now, and I disassociated my weight from my worth, essentially, I started being nice to myself and actually speaking to myself as though I'd already achieved my goal. I ended up losing weight more easily than I ever have in my life. And for the first time ever, for me, it's personally really important because I was gaining it as a result of abusing myself and binging and restricting and all these horrible diet rubbish. It just stayed off because I continued to speak to myself with kindness. And the interesting thing was my food and exercise choices just fell into, they would have stuck out like a sore thumb if I was being unkind to myself when it came to food choices. And not just in terms of weight loss, but things like, am I drinking enough water? Am I taking the stairs? Am I getting enough fresh air? All of that stuff all of a sudden came into play as well, which of course contributes to how positive we feel, which in turn contributes to how capable we feel of doing difficult things. So again, it seems simple. And a lot of this is just going back to common sense and not getting lost in all the, I was going to say self-help, but I mean, that's literally what I do. So I don't know what I'm talking about.
No, but I think a lot of people that aren't involved in wellness and well-being can be overwhelmed by the amount of different methods and different techniques and different disciplines that are available. And I guess like what you're saying is you don't necessarily have to do any of this complicated array of stuff that's out there. You can just start to generate self-compassion and find that, you know, the results of that make you feel better. And then it's kind of like a knock-on effect and you keep on, you know, and you stick with it.
And I think it's about taking the advice you would give other people.
Yeah.
Simple as that. Don't get me wrong, there's always going to be experts out there who can help you. But sometimes when it comes to the basic stuff and you notice yourself trying to understandably swerve discomfort by saying, oh, I can't do this now. I have to sign up to something tomorrow. And then from that point, an expert can tell me. It's worth asking yourself, if someone called you and wanted a bit of advice, what would you tell them to do? And the answer's there. I think this is what we need to move towards. And actually, luckily, I don't know that much about the wellbeing industry because I'm relatively new to it, but it's definitely promising to see that there's a real push towards people saying, you already have the tools. You don't have to part with loads of money and time. Just ask yourself the right questions and be honest with yourself. Get more self-aware, get more self-compassionate, and build your self-belief.
Big time. You know, towards the end of my my drinking habit, I was going through these cycles of self-loathing the day after, you know, having a lot of drinks, or even self-loathing once I'd had a few drinks when I was out, because I knew that it was a bad habit that I was relying on far too much. But how I don't quite know. I can't quite say at the moment because it's still relatively fresh in my mind. But I can't think about how I actually managed to turn that switch and stop what I felt was a bad habit and the cycle of self-loathing, blah blah blah, and get into a good habit. Do you have any specific methods that sort of allow people to first of all identify this bad habit and this bad pattern, and then to kind of flip it on his head and for it to become a good habit?
Absolutely. I think it's about taking the bad out of the habit. I think it's about saying, if you've adopted a habit, then it's possible, very possible, that it's doing something for you, or it has done something for you in the past. So rather than beating yourself up about it and thinking, why can't I do this thing that seems so simple? It's about not underestimating your relationship with that habit, almost thanking it for whatever it's helped you do up to this point, and appreciating that the relationship's turned. And it might still be doing something for you. So say, for example, you have a glass of wine at the end of the day and you don't want that to turn into two. It's about asking yourself, what is the glass of wine helping me do? It's helping me punctuate the end of a day. Brilliant. It's helping me feel less stressed. It's helping me connect with other people. It's giving me a ritual, whatever it is. It's helping me feel less anxious in the short term, whatever. fine, put that in your toolkit of coping strategies for stress or anxiety or boredom or breaking up the day, and then fill that toolkit up with other stuff that does the same job. Don't expect it to do as good a job as alcohol early doors, though. But the thing I tend to find is the way I try to think of what's a good and bad habit without using those kinds of words is, because what I'm always afraid of is that people might be like me, and when they hear more and more, you've got a bad habit, you've got a bad habit, if their self-esteem is low, that they think that they're bad, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I lost my train of thought. Coping strategies, yes. What I tend to find helps massively is, in my life, I think if it's a good habit, it tends to not be very effective early on, but I can get better at it. And if it's a not so good habit that I want to use not as frequently and I don't want to depend on as often in my toolkit of coping strategies, there's probably something my tolerance is going to build to, and probably something that's going to be really effective right now, but maybe, I mean, let's face it, I'm talking about booze. That seems pretty obvious, but you know, in that case, because it does do that job for so many people in so many ways. How do I reward myself? How do I celebrate? How do I commiserate? You know, how do I escape from modern day life for a little bit and distract and deal with boredom? Like, these are all genuine needs, and it's no wonder that alcohol has served so many of them when it's so readily available and normalized from such a young age. So yeah, my answer to that would be, look at it as a toolkit that you're always looking to diversify, and don't ask what's wrong with your habit, ask what it's been doing for you. Because if I asked 10 people what's bad about smoking, they'd all tell me the same stuff.
Sure.
But if you ask them, like, how did it start? How did your relationship with smoking start? How has it helped you? What job has it done for you? What job does it continue to do for you? Then all of a sudden you realize everyone's got a very unique story, and there's a lot of insight to be gained from that. So we're not bad and our habits aren't bad. That's my thing.
Well, it's what I've found from speaking to you, and what I hadn't really considered before, was the fact that we have these habits, and these habits are often, as you say, a cover for something else, or they're fulfilling a need, but the habits begin at such an early stage, or unconsciously, that we're not even able to identify the fact that they are giving us confidence, you know, making us feel like we're party boy, or like, you know, whatever superpower we think it's giving us. And the habit is just always there, and until you're able to unravel it and work out what is this actually a cover for, then that's when the work can really begin. Because otherwise you're just you're looking at the habit as this bad thing that you just can't stop doing. But once you're able to actually look at yourself and work out what you're about and why it's there, then you can start to think, okay, because like with me, for example, typical story, like, you know, a little bit socially awkward, especially in my teens, drinking, lad culture, going to watch the football, etc., etc. And, you know, the main reason why I would drink, especially early on in the night, was for confidence. Now, because I don't drink anymore, I've had to try and find that confidence within myself. And like you say, like in the beginning, it's really difficult, because I've spent so much of my life just go out, go straight to the bar, have a few drinks. I feel ready to, like, you know, interact with people and be myself. But that self has always existed. It's just that I get there via alcohol. Now that I can go out and be a bit more confident in myself and not need that, it feels so much better. But it took such a long time to get there.
Yeah, I bet it is. It's not easy what you've done, I know. And I think it's also not easy in a part of the world where it's so normalized to have that as a crutch. Like, it's almost the fact that you would have to answer the question of why am I not drinking is, I think that's something that I really hope is definitely changing. But I think you're absolutely right. Sometimes people become pleasantly surprised and realize that they're giving alcohol too much credit. So even if you are a drinker, I think it's worth every now and then just choosing not to demonstrate to yourself that all the other stuff you've done in your life has contributed to you not needing the same things you did when you were 15. Like, it's possible that at 35, say for example, you've done enough public speaking at work, you've had enough difficult conversations with your friends, you've developed friendships that are intimate and close and fun enough that you don't need to do that, and you're not awkward and teenager. It just so happens that we don't have this sort of check-in framework in our world. We don't have like a personal CV. We don't think, oh, do you know what, when I was 15, this is what I needed. I couldn't talk to people because I had no social skills and I hadn't learned and all this stuff. And now I'm 40 and actually I'm not sure I need this crutch anymore. But we just carry on. And then in the meantime, our tolerance increases too. Just as a side thing, which doesn't help. And so I think sometimes a lot of people are really pleasantly surprised when they stop drinking, I found. And I'd certainly make a concerted effort. I do drink, but I definitely make a concerted effort to be asking myself, why are you drinking? Like, what's this drink for? Especially if I'm already having a great time and I feel feels so much better to know that it's on you while you're having a great time. It's on the fact that the people you're with are awesome and the conversations you're having are great, and you don't need it. Like, you don't need it, frankly. And sometimes it's great, don't get me wrong. I don't, drink isn't personally compared to food. That's my thing. But it's definitely worth asking myself, like, if I feel nervous and I think I might have a glass of wine, then I'm like, no. You want to be able to know that you can go somewhere and get to know people and make friends without this old friend that you made when you were like 12. I don't know. How old are people when they start drinking? How old were you when you started drinking?
I think I was about 14 or 15.
All right.
It was the last couple of years at school. I can remember the first time I got drunk, and I don't have to tell anybody that it was so embarrassing. Like, told my best friend that I loved him, fell over, knocked some stuff over at a house party. Like, it was all the usual. Without actually, I don't think I was sick, but all the other things that you do when you first get drunk, I did. And but like the thing was, the next day, everybody was like, you were so drunk, you were so funny, and blah blah blah. And you kind of think, oh wow, okay. And then you go out again and have a few drinks, and you start to, your subconscious tells you that you go out, have a drink, have a great time. And I never got into fights or anything like that. I never really had anything negative happen when I went out. I actually had, I have to say, I've always pretty much had a great time, apart from when I felt sick. So like, there was never any point where it was like, this is not good for me. As you say, like, there was no point where I sort of stopped and checked in with myself and said, hold on a minute, do I need to keep on doing this? Why am I doing this? There's none of that. And like, you're so right. And I think sorry to get deep, but on a much wider scale, sometimes I think the whole world could do with just stopping for a while and checking in and saying, is this progress or is this not really progress? And like, how do we implement ideas into our society that help people to kind of be a bit more self-aware and like, have more self-compassion too?
Self-compassion in general.
Yeah.
I think that I agree with you. I think we need to find a way for, call it self-help, call it personal development, call it self-care, call it checking in, mindfulness, whatever it is. I really wish we lived in a world where people did that before stuff got difficult. Feels like so often people need to have their own rock bottom, or they need to have something happen. And the saddest part, I mean, it's obviously sad because you don't want people feeling that way, but also we know that it's so much harder to adopt habits when we feel good, when we have resources at our disposal, not when we've completely run out and we're empty. And so I think it would be great if we lived in a world where people were nicer to themselves. And I think anyone working in the helping professions too will tell you that the value it's non-negotiable. Taking care of yourself, you have to, so that you can take care of other people anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
And the whole oxygen mask thing is so true. But I think more and more the way I'm trying to get in is by demonstrating that being nicer to yourself gets stuff done. It really does. I mean, we obviously all deserve it regardless. But if I'm not winning over people with that yet, then at least know that it gets stuff done.
And all right, in terms of that, then, besides getting a handle on your weight issues, what are the other aspects of your life that you've managed to kind of, get ahead on? Or I guess writing a book would have been part of that. No?
You know what? I loved writing a book, and I feel very, very grateful to have written a book. But I often say, because I want people to understand that how much I've been there. Changing my binge and restrict eating habits was harder than writing a book. Definitely. I personally also have had challenges with codependency, sort of like needing to control things. I've been in counseling to talk about anxiety. So definitely anxiety is one of my things. And invariably all these things tend to sort of link in with each other somewhere, don't they? In the wonderful, complex nature via nurture way that it does for all of us. But yeah, anxiety is a big one for me. I've really changed my habits around there. And a lot of the time, the self-awareness bit begins with just noticing something coming up and then changing whether you actually respond to it, whether you choose to respond to it. So there's a real power that comes with that. And then I found with anxiety, the more I've been able to evidence and demonstrate to myself, literally gather data of times where the thing I worried would happen didn't happen, and choose to clock it, the more quickly I can soothe myself when I feel myself getting anxious. And obviously, I mean, that is not going to be the case for everyone. We know with all of these things, we're on such a scale, and we have to hear everyone's very unique experience. But for me, it was general everyday anxiety, and I did things like journaling. I would write down what was making me anxious, even on my phone, or dictate it, and just getting it out was definitely helpful.
Oh, cool.
Exercise. But with all of this, in order to implement any of these routines, I think even just to want to do that, you have to feel capable. You have to be talking to yourself. Anything you want to change is going to be hard. Even if you're changing for the better and there's no downsides, you're disrupting the status quo. You're not in your place of comfort. So it's going to be hard. And for that, I think that's what it's helped me with enormously. And then procrastination too. A huge one. I mean, especially when I was writing the book, I remember once I procrastinated so much, and all of a sudden I thought in my head, oh, you can't write a book if you haven't got candles. Like,
yes.
You've got to have loads of candles. So I left the house, went to the other side of London. And I was like, this is getting absurd. You need to look at yourself the same way you did with food, the same way you did with I used to have real sort of like, try and keep myself safe by controlling things and people and just all sorts. And I was like, okay, check it. And I think the difference for me came when I was able to just, like, now a few years ago, I would have never admitted any of this stuff openly. And now that I do, there's no shame.
No, exactly.
It isn't about saying it was right, or that anyone that got hurt or any damage I caused in the meantime was fine and right. Absolutely not. But I think that the best chance of, God, it sounds like I was some horrible person. I genuinely wasn't. But you know what I mean? Like, while you're finding yourself, that's just your journey.
Always, yeah.
But to find out where it came from and be cool with it and forgive yourself, even if other people won't sometimes, I think is still the quickest way of benefiting everyone, including yourself.
Yeah, no, I totally agree.
Yeah. Really?
And actually going back to the meditation retreat, I also did that. I also sat down, for hours on end and started to forgive myself. And it was a really, really interesting process, because as I was sort of digging deep and thinking about the times that I'd wronged people, etc., loads of shame and all, loads of like difficult emotions came up. And I was forgiving myself, but then there was also this other part of me that was like, how dare you forgive yourself? Like, it's and worrying that if I told people that I'd forgiven myself, that they'd be like, well, that's easy. Anyone can forgive themselves. But actually, we hold on to stuff so much and blame ourselves, and actually don't forgive ourselves for whether it's like for having a bad habit, or for wronging someone, or for whatever, or for tripping over and falling over and looking silly, like so many things, you just hold on to them, and they all weigh you down, and actually, like, it's just not good for you. So if you can actually just go, do you know what, I acknowledge that and I forgive myself, it's gone. It's a weight off your shoulders, and you do feel lighter for it. And I definitely during that meditation session felt so much lighter afterwards, because I had actually gone, you were such a dick then, but you know what? I forgive you.
The same way you would another person. And you know what? Again, that's another thing when it comes to habits. How many people consider themselves all or nothing people? You know, how many people, in the case of, say, changing any habit, usually drinking and eating is a good example here because they're so normalized. So they'll say, I'm going to drink more water or eat more fruit or go to the gym this week. And then they don't do it on the Monday. And they're like, oh, well, I'll just have to wait until next Monday now, won't I? The whole day's ruined, the whole week's ruined. And so this idea of forgiveness can also, I think, extend to treating a sort of blip or a deviation or an unplanned deviation as something that's not a catastrophe.
Yeah.
Like it again, it brings it back to common sense. If you were trying to help someone develop and be a better person and achieve their goals and get back on track, you would not say to them, oh, you know what, you should never forgive yourself. You know, the answer is to never forgive yourself, beat yourself up about it. It's not helping anyone. I'm not saying don't learn. Definitely learn. I don't think we should all go around just constantly being like, oh, I was a dick, never mind. Oh, I was a dick, never mind. But I do think that it's worth thinking, what is the value once I've learned from this of continuing to beat myself up about it? And in the case of habit change, I think it's actually really counterproductive. Because that's where you get that spiraling, catastrophizing, I've blown it now, everything's ruined. And then that sort of binge self-punishing mentality that got me into some real trouble and made me assume that I was an all or nothing person.
Yeah, it's quite, I guess it's quite a limiting belief to have, isn't it, in some respects, to sort of have that all or nothing kind of mentality, because you know it does, you do trip up a lot of times through sort of adopting that kind of mentality. I was thinking, you know, when people give up, they can often have a relapse, and you know it happens time and time again. And you know it's a natural part of giving up, because giving up is very hard, and actually it can be very easy to relapse. But then you relapse and you're like, oh, I'm so rubbish. Or like, you know, you might have had like your daily counter on Instagram where it's like 250 days, and then you happen to have a relapse the next day and it's like, oh, I've ruined all those days. But it's like, no, you haven't. Like, you know, you're only human being. These things happen. Get back on the horse and start riding again, you know, because it's just, it is hard. It's one of the, it's definitely one of the most difficult things that I've done, is, you know, just telling myself that I'm not going to, because I work in the music industry. So like music events, gigs, festivals, all that kind of stuff. And, you know, everyone's doing something. So like it initially was very difficult because you want to be on the same level as everybody else. And so, you know, how do you get to the same level as everybody else? You do what they're doing. But now I've been able, through a lot of experiences, through a lot of difficult experiences, again, like with the confidence thing, to find that energy in myself to act giddy and jump around and be silly with everybody else. And actually, I find that I get energy from them. So, you know, they're being silly and drunk and, you know, babbling away and doing whatever they, and I can actually take some of that giddiness and you know, have it myself and bounce off them. And it's taken a long time. And, you know, anyone that's watching, I literally, you know, it took me a good few months of, you know, going to Glastonbury and wherever to actually get to that point. And I'm quite fortunate that I was going to a lot of events. So maybe I learned a bit quicker, but, you know, you really can get there. You really can get there. And I
mean, you say you were more fortunate, but I would say also that you were tested more frequently.
Yes, yeah.
I think it's,
sure.
You know, it is enormously, I can imagine it was enormously difficult for you. But did you find that, like, when you managed to get through those, that then after that you could feel calmer about the next one and the next one? Yeah,
definitely. I think the other thing that I worried about loads, and somebody's just asked a question about this, which is brilliant. Hi, Tara. Was about I had this complex about being boring. Even it wasn't even really to do with drinking. It was just one of my confidence issues. And, you know, sometimes if someone was like really drunk or really high and they were sort of chatting to me, I would worry that the way that I was responding, eventually I'd be like, oh, he's boring. What's the matter with him? So like, that was one of the reasons why I would drink, would be to sort of, you know, tap into this like exciting, fun side of myself that doesn't exist when I don't drink, which is obviously a load of rubbish. But, you know, it's again, it's one of those things like you sort of almost create this identity, and then it's this concrete identity that you can't move out of unless you go through this portal, this alcohol portal into like fun, Marcus.
Well, what about your opinion of the situation too? Like,
yeah, well,
you're thinking that they think you're boring. Are you not thinking they're deeply annoying, repeating themselves constantly? Like, you know, that's what I think when I'm drinking and someone else isn't. I'm like, oh God, they're actually behaving like a civilized person.
You know,
and I must have repeated myself. Or
I would actually get that quite a lot, where people would apologize for being so drunk. I'll be like, honestly, you're making me laugh so much that it really doesn't matter. And I'm laughing at you and with you most of the time.
yeah, and I think we also need to, you see, I know that labels can really empower people in all sorts of ways, but I think that there's also a huge group of people who could really get on board with statements like, doesn't agree with me, or I don't feel like it today, or I'm just trying to see what kind of night I have if I don't, or I might just give it a couple of hours before I start. These are all options before words even like sober or alcohol free or clean, or, you know, whatever. You don't, if you don't feel that those labels are for you, then you don't need to hold on. There are certain foods. I don't have intolerances. There are just certain foods, for some reason, my body doesn't feel great when I eat them. So if someone cooks it, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not about to like spit it out or anything. But sometimes I'll say, just for some reason, that doesn't agree with me. Or at the moment, I don't seem to be doing well on the old white wine. You know, it gives me anxiety tomorrow. I think honesty, it really is the best policy. And I think the more and more we have these conversations, the more we realize that we are not in the minority. There are very few people who could drink heavily for their whole lives and not feel anything and not have anything to talk about when it comes to how they feel the next day or the toll it's taking on them. Or in my case, for example, I'm definitely noticing as I get older, doesn't help with the anxiety. It doesn't at all.
No way.
It's a thing. Whereas I don't get particularly bad hangovers. So I'm sure there are people who would relate to each of these things if we were honest about them and we weren't afraid of them thinking that something terrible had happened, that we're some secret that we're keeping, or that we're judging them.
Got another question here. How do you cope with people who don't respect your boundaries when it comes to pushing food or booze, or trying to guilt trip you to mirror their behavior?
I think that's one for you, isn't it, Marcus? I think you probably had that experience.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm quite stubborn and strong-minded, and so when I kind of made my decision not to drink, I stuck with it, and no matter how much. I think most of my friends, if I say I'm going to do something or not do something, they actually do kind of respect my boundaries. I definitely had times where, you know, maybe I was hanging out, you know, especially being in the music industry, I'd be like, you know, maybe backstage at a festival or a club, and the promoter might offer me a drink, and sometimes be, you know, a little bit pushy about it. And somebody told me actually, if someone does that, just say, they say, do you want a drink? I'll have a soft drink. And that kind of, rather than saying I don't drink, because that might put them on the back foot a little bit, just say, oh yeah, I'll have and it kind of almost surprises them into going, oh, okay, I'll get you a lemonade or whatever, you know. So I guess it's just kind of about being pleasant in the way that you respond to people, you know, trying to like not respect your boundaries, because if you flare up a little bit, that can make them a bit prickly, and it can maybe cause a bit of a situation. But if you're kind of firm but respectful and friendly about it, I think usually, unless they're a bit of a, you know, waste of space, I think they'll usually respect your boundaries.
Yeah.
And sorry, I wanted to address Tara's question a little bit more. How do I stop feeling like a party pooper? Because her biggest problem comes from not drinking with friends who want to share a bottle of wine, and that can be quite tricky. I mean, as I said, didn't really have that problem, because as soon as I said to my friends I'm not drinking, 99% of them were kind of like, okay, cool, we respect that. But you know, a lot of people may not have that kind of that luxury, I guess. So, and also like it's how it plays into your own sort of sense of self, isn't it? Like I said, I kind of felt a bit boring, and you know, Tara's worried that she's like feeling like a party pooper, but I guess you can change the way that you think about yourself.
Yeah. And I think the way that people change, or the ways that I've got new opinions on stuff or seen things from different angles, is people like yourself, Tara, saying it for the first time. And then, you know, I remember when I started in this work, I really didn't want to be the first person who said stuff. I really didn't like that idea that I would be trying to change people's minds. I didn't want the idea of having an unpopular opinion, being on my own, people thinking that I was weird or whatever. And I realized it's actually, sometimes these are just conversations people aren't having. And it doesn't mean that they're going to disagree with you. It just means that they haven't had that conversation yet. And after they have that conversation with you, they're no longer going to put people under pressure to drink, because it just hadn't occurred to them. So I think sometimes it is about giving it a go before you assume the way that people are going to respond as well. And just saying, hey, look, wine, something's changed, more negatives than positives for me overall. Wine's not my jam, you know, and finding your way of doing it. And also saying, you know, the more you pressure me, you want me to be happy, right? So let me do my thing. I'm fine. I'm having a great time with you. You don't need to change anything you do. Just let me do me. I agree with you. I think most people tend to be pretty cool with that.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I can remember, I've got memories of being that person though, who's like, come on, have a drink. What's the matter with you?
Probably because you wanted to. I think,
yeah, exactly.
this is the other thing too. I think it's about not making other people feel judged. That's what a lot of people are afraid of. So if you don't drink, you're going to judge me. So maybe just reassure them in that sense, that like, couldn't care less what you consume or don't consume. I'm just trying to worry about what I consume or don't consume. You crack on, you know? I think that's where maybe some of the fear is, and where people try to find other people who normalize the amount that they drink or the frequency with which they eat at McDonald's or whatever else. Once they are very clear on the fact that you have absolutely no interest in what they decide to do, and that we're all adults doing our own thing, a lot of people will just chill and be like, okay, well then I'll do my thing and you do yours, I think. Yeah,
I totally agree. There's a question from Ruth as well, which is, where do you suggest someone starts who is new to this with the absolute basics when it comes to reviewing habits? Because, you know, as we've discussed, like, habits are quite unconscious most of the time. So how do you kind of get started with the basics of actually identifying habit and sort of unpicking it?
There's a few things you can do. One of them is deciding, doing 2 maps, like just mind maps, with the date today and the date in a year's time in the middle of each one, and write the difference between how you want your life to look now and how you want it to look then, when it comes to whatever area of your life. This is I want to feel more mindful at work. I want to be less hasty. I want to eat more healthily. I want to and then work backwards from the goal that you want to achieve. And what can be really powerful is looking at the difference between these 2 things, and when you invariably want to give up, because you will, otherwise you would have done it by now. You look at the difference and you think, wow, at any given time, I'm either creating habits that move me closer to this outcome, or move me closer to this outcome, which I find very helpful. And the other thing is, as you know, I think forewarned is forearmed when it comes to our triggers a lot of the time, and the things that are going to test us. So I would say, just spend 1 minute in the morning guessing the things that you think are going to test you that day and want you to go off track, and commit to noticing them. And the more you notice them, the less you'll follow through with them.
Brilliant. Thank you, Shahroo. We're at the end now. So
thank you, Marcus.
It's a shame. I would have liked to have chatted to you longer, but there you go.
Me too. Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone that's tuned in, and stay tuned for the next chat.